I think that really is what I love about shows is the people you meet, the stories, the conversation.
Welcome, adventurers. This podcast features Jon Hill of iPardalis, individually raised chameleons. We talk about what he's up to, how he got here, and what he's up to next. Buckle up, the adventure begins now. To the music. All right, welcome, adventurers. On this podcast, we have Jonathan Hill, who's from iPardalis. Welcome, Jonathan. Do you like being called Jonathan or John?
Jonathan reminds me of when I'm in trouble.
Okay. So I'll just
John
call you
is
Jonathan when I don't like your answers. That's the way we'll do
yeah,
this. And if
yeah,
I'm liking what you're saying, I'll just call you John, huh? All right.
yeah.
Okay.
John is fine.
Okay.
There are some who call me Jonathan, and that's fine too.
Okay. How would you define yourself? Not in the sense of in the reptile world or reptile show world. How would you define yourself?
As a small breeder specialized in panther chameleons,
Hmm.
but who I got started like most people um, with a wild garter snake that
Hmm.
happened to be gravid and gave me a ton of babies, and I thought that was the coolest thing. So I've gotten into panthers later in life, but throughout my life, starting before I was 10, I've always had a reptile in my life of some kind. Yeah.
Okay. So what was your first reptile?
I believe it was that garter snake.
That garter
But the
snake.
first, yeah, but the first one that I bought
Mm-hmm.
was a ball python. So a normal ball python back in the day. Yeah, well, it was way before there weren't really many morphs. Like when I got my ball python and when I had my garter snake, there were a few albino corn snakes on the market, and that was like the only morph that I was aware of. Um, I'm sure in the 90s, like early 90s, late 80s, um, there probably were some other morphs out there, but they just weren't in Western New York.
Okay.
And that was like we're talking like pre-internet, so if it wasn't hitting Reptiles magazine, I wasn't seeing it.
Sure,
So
it's been a really crazy world, I've been doing this for
yeah,
33 years and I started with my first iguana. I almost have to say this every episode that my wife bought me and I can't even list out all the species I've ever had. It
yeah,
would take the entire show. Okay.
yeah.
On that topic, what can you list the main species that you've had or the ones you like the most or
So the species that I've had the majority of my life, I've always had at least one colubrid in my possession.
Mhm,
I have some corn snakes that I got in 1992
mhm,
that are still living with me.
mhm,
Um, and I have some of their babies that I couldn't find homes for that are still with me. And more recently, I started a pine snake project, Northern Mexican pine snake
mhm,
project with two pairs. So I've always enjoyed colubrids,
mhm,
and I'm probably always going to have them
mhm,
uh, with me. And then I'd say probably about 8 years ago is when I got into panther chameleons, and they were my first chameleon species. I've been breeding them ever since. So started iPardalis, individually raised panther chameleons
mhm,
in, I think I officially registered the LLC in like 2019, 2018,
mhm,
somewhere in there. I think it was right in the turn of that year.
mhm.
Um, and I've been more professionally dedicated to that project since then.
Okay, wow. So why don't you talk to me about the individual raising of panthers? What's the big deal there?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big thing was when I was doing my research about this project, I had been listening to Bill Strand's podcasts
Mhm,
at the Chameleon Academy,
mhm,
and I had read some of his blog articles about individually raising and some of the research that was out there, um, and it seemed like it was the I really liked the premise
mhm,
that these are solitary animals. Um, they they do really well by themselves,
mhm,
and so by raising them individually, um, you can get the best outcomes. You give them uh, highest quality of life, and you get the best quality product from a breeding standpoint. Um, and so I thought that was great. It's like, hey, there's a business opportunity there, given that it's a high quality product and ethical. It's also good for them. It's what they need. And at the time, I was mostly on the chameleon forums initially. I didn't do any social media for the first 2-3 years. I could see a lot of people were group raising animals, and I could see the evidence of that. Whether it be scrape marks, brown coloration, nips, and eye injuries, and you name it, right? Like all of the obvious negative impacts of group raising. And so I felt like there was an opportunity there, and I knew that I really enjoyed the species and wanted to do right by them. So from the beginning, I had that as my goal, and it's challenging. Like it's really hard to do that. So even though that's been my goal from the beginning, there's been times where it's been just like the infrastructure's not there. It's impossible. The timing is tough to gauge, especially when I was starting, like first started. I mean, I hadn't heard as many of the stories about getting double and triple clutched on, where they get all synced up,
Mhm.
and so you think you have enough cages, and then all of a sudden you need twice as many as you thought you needed. And so in situations where that happened early on, I had to use bins, and I had to use some other things to do, like groups of 4. And so I did get some experience with group raising and saw how much worse it is. And so now I know the value. It's like it's not just secondhand knowledge, it's firsthand knowledge. And I have been dedicated to it ever since. So
I guess it should be a disclosure that I have 3 of your Panthers, but you didn't send them to me to get on this podcast. I bought them or had some of them sent to me long before we ever considered this podcast. But they are
yeah,
incredible. I have 2 females who have some of the most brilliant colors, and my male, he's as brilliant as any of the wild caughts I've ever had, and just awesome to see him. And he's huge. He's as big as any of the wild caughts I've ever had that were probably
yeah,
older, and probably not even 2 yet. So he's huge,
yeah.
and they've been doing very well.
And that's actually one of the cool things about individually raising is the size is a polygenic trait, right? Color is a polygenic trait. If you know, like height is polygenic. And so you'll notice in certain regions around the world, even people will have lower average heights because of not getting enough food when they're younger, or the way that they've been raised. And the same goes for the size of a panther chameleon, the color of a panther chameleon. If they're raised in a certain way, they actually will be more vibrant. They will be larger. It's a pretty cool like reward
Mm-hmm.
for having done that. So I think that's also something that's really interesting from just a genetic standpoint, and understanding that when you have a polygenic trait, it interacts with the environment a little bit more than other types of traits, like where you just have a dominant trait, it's present, you get it. It's the relationship is not as complex. It's not as common for those types of traits to be impacted by things like husbandry.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I've very much seen that with your Panthers. So those they're huge, and I'm just kind of getting into Panther breeding. I was doing all those strange green ones at Jackson's, and that was great because you didn't have to incubate eggs, but it was also just as bad because they would drop 30, 60 babies on you. I've never had to
Yeah.
catch a 60, but I had like 30 or 40 babies dropped one night, and then I had to get
Oh
something
my.
to bin raise them until I could get all the cages cleaned and ready to go. So
Timing those for individual raising would be even more fun,
yeah,
I
well,
imagine.
sometimes it's great and you don't have to incubate it, but yeah, you can't diapause them; they diapause themselves. So it's crazy because
Exactly.
you can't predict based on breeding. They
Yeah.
say it's 6 months for some things, and they could drop at 5 months. They can wait 4 or 5 years, and you see them drop them, and that you're like, well, those can't be fertile because it's been 5 years, and you're like, oh, here they dropped one day, one morning, what have you. Every time I went away somewhere, they would drop babies. So I was just
Of
I
course.
would like plan a couple extra hours before we went away to check for the babies until they drop. So that's
Yeah.
great. So, what other
Yep.
exotic pets have you kept? Anything besides reptiles?
I had a African pygmy hedgehog. I've had different species of fish,
Mhm.
mostly like common species. I
Mhm.
haven't done anything with like saltwater. We had lovebirds. We had a pair of lovebirds growing up, and let's see. I don't know. I don't think hamsters and rats and all like different types of rodents count, but we've had all of those.
They count,
Like
you know. For my daughter would tell you
yeah.
they count. She's got
Okay.
she's got hamsters. She's got a hedgehog that I had to buy in order to get Caitlin to do this podcast.
When I was growing up, we basically had everything that you could find at a pet store in our house. So
That's awesome. Were your parents just allowing all that stuff, or was it just were they begrudgingly, or did you have to take care of yourself?
I was a free range child. I was responsible for them,
Mhm.
and the I would get a no. I would always get a no.
Mhm.
You had to learn how to get past the no to a
Mhm.
yes, right?
Mhm.
With the ball python, it was easy. I just got my mom to hold it, and then after she held it the first time, she's like, "Okay, how much does it cost? This is so nice." I rode my bike to the pet store to because I would go there all the time, and then I ride it home, and then talk to my mom. And this was when I was before I was 10. I would do this, and like they, I have all these stories that when I would kind of just like I said, true free range kid. Today they wouldn't let you do this stuff, but I would go to the pet store, check it out. I knew it was first name basis from pretty early, and at some point I worked out a deal where I could trade in some snakes for feeders, like for a year's worth of feeders. And so that's when when I was breeding some of my corn snakes, I was just trading them for mice, frozen mice. And yeah, I knew the pet store owner pretty well, pretty quickly. Yeah, no, we worked out some deals, and he knew that it was my thing, and
Mhm.
I was going to help him. I was very eager to do whatever he wanted. I'd say sometimes I would take the Windex out and start
Mhm. Mhm.
cleaning glass.
Mhm.
Make the displays look nice for him, and whatever.
That's always good. You butter them up by cleaning the stores, doing the work they didn't want to do, and then they help you out.
And then like somebody comes in the store is how old is this kid?
But I guess there's no bottom age for volunteering. So just when
Nope.
they're paying is when they get you into troubles. What do you currently keep besides the snakes and the panthers? Do you have anything else or?
We have some yellow spotted climbing tree toads.
Mhm.
I have 5 females.
Mhm.
I got 5 hoping for different sexes, and I got all female. So that project's just it is lots of female toads, which is
Mhm.
cool. That's a species that I had been watching for a while, and I was very happy to get those. Obviously, the snakes, the chameleons. We have a dog. No, we have some Europlatus sicari. I think that's about it. I mean, we got first for minor
Mhm.
also, but
Mhm.
another chameleon species. I got my initial breeding group from Frank Payne,
Mhm.
and then I've picked up males from John Mykos, Michael Nash,
Mhm.
and I did get a female from Kevin Stanford back when he had some. I'm working now with mostly the animals that I produced in 2021
Mhm.
in that project, and bought some males to mix in. But that's a really challenging project, and it almost takes as much time as my Panthers, just
Wow.
with a small group.
So their import status is they're not allowed to be imported. Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
okay,
no more imports.
is that because
And
they're endangered in the wild, or what? What I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming in from Madagascar, but
as I understand it, they're CITES 2. There has been no quota for them for many years. When you look at what's on those export quotas, first for minor haven't been on the list for a very long time, and they probably won't be added to the list because I know that their CITES classification is because of habitat degradation and the fact that there's a decent number of them where they can be found, but that range is not very large. So that's why they're on the list.
yeah, I actually have a minor, but I don't know its background. I got it from Bill, and he didn't. It was kind of given to him, and I don't know the background of it, and he wasn't either. He's not sure, or he doesn't know, or never knew, and so I can't breed it to anything because I don't know what line it would be breeding it to, and whether I'd be inbreeding or whatever. Are you still doing the genetics with the Panther? How's that going?
So I have tried to keep in touch with Benson Morrill.
Mhm.
He's the CEO of Rare Genetics
Mhm.
Inc., and he was recently signed as kind of the primary genetic service for Morph Market. And when that happened, he got really busy,
Yeah, I
um,
bet.
which which is great for him and his business, but it's not great for our locale test. And
Right.
so I'm working on a mini series on Panther Chameleon genetics right now, a podcast series,
Great.
and I hope to bring him on to interview him
Mhm.
so that then he has to answer my questions. Um, every once in a while, we like I can get him on the phone.
Mhm.
I caught him on the phone while he was on vacation recently because that's like the only time he's got free time to take a phone call. But
So you
um,
took away some of his vacation because he's too busy.
hey, that's same for me. So I like I don't feel bad. Benson's a good guy. He's
Mhm.
he's working on the test. Another person that I'd hope I'm going to reach out to is actually Modry, who wrote the 2015 paper
Mhm.
that published the data
Mhm.
for the locale test. He went out and collected over 300 wild caught samples and did the genetic sequencing on snippets of their DNA, not a full genetic sequence. But I would like to at least ask him if he wants to talk to me,
Mhm.
and so that I'll be able to provide an update on that. Hopefully, he's a part of the conversation too.
Great. So where will this podcast on the genetics of panthers be found?
It hasn't been announced, I don't think publicly. I think this will be the
Okay.
first one, but it's planned. Bill is planning to do it as a uh, part of the Chameleon Academy network.
Okay. Great. Yeah, because the Community
Yeah,
Academy Network is something we've talked about on the live show. We haven't been
yeah,
specific about it and anything like that.
yeah. I
He talked
listened to
about it
that
doing.
conversation with Dylan, and I was like, I know it's coming. So
Right, exactly. That's crazy because that's exactly what happened there. And that was I because I did the podcast with Dylan myself, and it came out several weeks later. But when we did the live show, after we turned off the cameras and started talking, there was a lot more said and a lot more done, and there was a lot more convincing
uh,
that went on. So I was kind of privy to
oh,
oh
good.
boy, there's a lot more coming here, and we're going to see this because I could see
Oh,
Bill's
cool.
wheels turning. So, what are your goals at this point?
It's kind of hard to articulate
Mm-hmm.
specific goals. I enjoy learning
Mm-hmm.
new things, and I feel like with Panther Chameleons, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot we don't know, and so whether that be in parasitology, genetics, you name it, any of the more advanced aspects of breeding Panther Chameleons, that's what I'm interested in. From a marketing standpoint and a business standpoint, I've always had the goal of producing the highest quality yellow body blue bar
Mm-hmm.
ambulobe that I can. And part of what I like about that is the high contrast,
Mm-hmm.
yellow and blue. So even if the bars have a little bit of mixed red in there, it's not going to bother me very much. Whereas the mixed body is not. I'm really not a fan of that. So from a selective breeding standpoint, I've been focused really on getting nice yellow bodies, nice clean bodies, and blue bars if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I was able to take one animal that had a ton of red, select his son with the most red, and then use that as a foundation for a red body blue bar
Mm-hmm.
project. And that animal's name is Ralph. But I've got Ralph and Cosmo to do a small red body blue bar project on the side of the yellow body project. But
That's great.
similar goals
Mm-hmm.
of like a clean red body with blue bars, focused primarily on the red body.
So I'm a lover of those red bodies, so I'm going to have to talk to you at some point as the project goes on. When I get to
Yeah.
doing, I've got like so many pairs of panthers that I am not breeding because I just don't want to end up with too many, and I'm just trying to be patient. And then I'm going to all these reptile shows, and I have to not buy stuff. That's my biggest goal. That's why I'm talking to other people and bringing them on the podcast and the show, just so I can enjoy different species without having to own them myself, because it's a lot easier to have someone. It's kind of like being a grandparent. Not that I'm one yet, but you have people bring them over and they take them home.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that individually raising them is my way of controlling my numbers because if I can't invest in enough infrastructure to do that, then I can't add it to the project, and so that keeps me focused because there's no way to achieve that goal and get too spread out.
Yeah, I have 3 lines of Mbanja that I'm working with, and I wanted to do envelope. But I just started with the Mbanja first. I don't remember why. I've got, I think, 8 pairs of envelopes that I just have that are like sitting there getting older every day, and I'm like desperate to breed them, but I'm like, don't do that. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
I could do it and diapause the eggs, but that would just get too complicated. So,
I mean, I don't know what the upper limit is of diapause.
mm,
Um, I've never experimented with that. I think the longest diapause I've done is 120 days, and that worked. But I don't know if you've heard of anybody diapausing for any longer than that.
no, not at all.
Have you?
In fact,
Yeah.
most of the time, nobody diapauses the panther eggs because they don't need to be diapaused, or at least it doesn't appear to be any benefit to the diapause per se.
Yeah.
No.
The only benefit is to you. You can spread them out. If you had like you have two get laid at the same
Mm.
time, then you can diapause one, knowing that you're gonna. Then you can spread them out.
You went to the Reds. You did the Blues. How did you get into the minors? Why did you decide on that?
Yeah. First for a minor, I think you can blame Frank Payne. Uh,
Okay.
I there's so I think every other post I have to stop myself when it comes to the really cool stuff that Frank has.
I stopped watching his channels and all his videos and everything else because it's just too
Yeah.
cool. I don't have time and energy, and
Yeah, those toad-headed agam. I really like that project that he has. There's just so many things that he has that are cool. And I was looking for a species of chameleon that I could keep in a similar way to a panther, right? Because I already have
Mhm,
the infrastructure for panthers, and I was
mhm,
looking for a project that was close to that, but that I could kind of leverage what I know about panthers and do a good job with. When I saw Frank's podcast with Bill, I've been tracking it ever since. Like I was just waiting for an opportunity to get involved. I love the female coloration on a first reminder. The gravid coloration is just stunning, with the black background and the
mhm,
yellow lines and the violet shoulder
mhm,
patch, red top on their head. It's just
mhm.
I don't know if there's anything else in the animal kingdom that's that cool. It's like it's one of those things where you see it and you're just blown away. So that's initially what got my attention was listening to the podcast, knowing that they
Mhm.
are similar to what I already know, that they're gorgeous and worth the effort because I don't have much time. So I was like, it needs to be worth it. And so First for Minor, I feel is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I actually had toad-headed
Oh yeah,
iguanas for a while, and I sold them to somebody because there was just they were just not like any other pet
yeah,
that I had, and so
exactly,
checking on
Mm,
them, and so I decided that there was better in somebody else.
exactly.
Is this job, the iPardalis and what have you, is that your job or is this a sidelight?
It's a serious project of mine, and I've turned it
Mhm,
into a business. But I have a full time job as a data scientist. That is my career. I don't know if there's ever a time when this will be able to compete with that. We'll see. if if things go really well, then the stars align. Then it might work out. But I honestly think that when you breed reptiles and you reinvest in them and you do it in an ethical way, it's very difficult for that to be your full time job. I'd love it to be. I'd love it to be possible. Currently, it doesn't compete, financially and so
mhm,
forth. So it's like there's a lot to the business side of it that make it really difficult to support a family. So my wife is employed; she could probably carry us for a little while. It's a big risk when you've got kids and college, and you're not, at least in my point in my life, and my kids are just starting school. If I had already gotten to a place where I had saved for retirement, the kids were out of the house, like you're a little bit less
mhm,
responsibility potentially. I don't know. I'm not that. I am not at that place in my life yet, but right now I feel a lot of responsibility to my family, and so I can't generally like I don't feel
mhm.
comfortable taking the risk of like just going all in.
Yeah, there are two major themes that you've talked about so far that are going with these podcasts that I've been doing. One is the inability to make it as a full
Hmm.
turn job. And the other issue that we constantly hear about is how Bill Strand happens to be the hand behind the curtain, always moving these things, always affecting everybody, always moving. And I don't know if that's because I do the live show with him and I'm on a bunch of different forums with him, or what it might be that it seems like even the people I meet at all the different reptile shows
Oh
seem
yeah,
to know Bill. So he seems to be the person behind
it's
all
the
that
man behind the
stuff. So
curtain.
this whole podcast was because he kind of walked me into it. He walked me into the live show. It was originally the live show for chameleon enthusiasts, and then he moved me into doing it myself. He went and left me, went to
Mm-hmm.
Madagascar, and I picked it up. And then the next thing I know, I thought maybe I should do a podcast. And he seemed to be the silent hand behind all this
Yeah.
stuff. So, but you know what? I loved what I'm doing, and I'm enjoying it, and that's why I'm doing it. Anything else that you want to talk about today?
Tell shows, I guess we could touch on a little bit. I've come at the business side of it from an ethical standpoint from the beginning. And so when I went to my first show, one of the things I wanted to be able to do was to show people at the point of sale what they needed to take care of their animals. So bring a fully planted setup with proper lighting, put it on a table,
Mm-hmm.
and put one chameleon in that cage and try to sell them. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't work very well. I'll say because most people were like, "Yeah, I don't need plants," and they'd walk by me, and then, eventually I'd hear things like, "Oh, you're selling chameleons, you're not selling plants," and because from a distance, people don't often get close enough to see the animal in the cage, and so they just think you're selling plants in a cage with lights on it for some reason. It's a downside because there's going to be people with them in the petri dishes, and people will see the species pretty easily, or sorry, sandwich dishes, not petri dishes, but like big dishes of various sorts that are clear, and that's always true. I think that dynamic at the show is similar to the dynamic online. Like, it's very easy for people to look at two pictures online, see the two prices, and then just say, well, this one's cheaper, and go get it, without realizing that that one was group raised, it's not as healthy, etc. The quality isn't there. Maybe the lineage is all over the place. And I think that part of the challenge that I've tried to take on, whether it be at shows or online, is to try to provide more information to people at the point of sale. And so, at the show, I did the same. I had the same mentality. I think that there's a huge opportunity for shows to encourage more of that, because
Mm-hmm.
they have control of the venue, and they could be a huge positive influence to herpetoculture as a whole, just by saying, hey, our show is not just about selling as many animals as we can. We want to make sure that people who come here are going to get good information, they're going to get healthy animals, and they have goals that are going to be beneficial to the hobby, to the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the more we do that, the bigger it's going to become. People are always concerned about like short-term revenue. Like, the difference between the guy with the food dishes and stuff and somebody who comes with the right mentality is that the person with those dishes is going to have a different animal in like 6 months. They're going to move on to something else because they're not going to succeed, right? They might be looking for that. They're reaching for that short-term revenue, but they get zero return customers. They get a bad reputation, and then they could potentially shrink the market as a whole for everyone, right? Because all the people who go off with those animals don't have a good experience, and then they never buy a reptile again, right? And if shows understood that, they had more of a long-term market growth focus, and one that's on long-term revenue over this short-term nonsense, then I think that the market would grow, and the hobby itself would benefit greatly. And I think it's also true for sustainable businesses, as it's like the people who are getting started as a business should be focused on quality and long-term outcomes, not the sale, not the one sale that's in front of them. Like at shows, you could probably hear people, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is pure Mbanja, pure Ambelobe. Like, they don't have any evidence for what they're saying, but they're just going to say whatever they think you want to hear to make the sale. And I feel like it's all connect. If you have the right mentality, you are focused on the long term, you're going to be more focused on integrity. You're going to be more focused on animal well-being. You're going to be more focused on repeat customers. And I feel like if shows bought into that, then we would end up with like tenfold growth in the number of people who actually keep reptiles, because they're going to have good experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to keep coming back. Because I think that that's the biggest thing, that we could do better as an industry.
That's a third theme to this podcast and the live shows, that people need to do better, give better information, and up the game at the reptile shows, and think long term and not think short term. I was 10 months at a reptile show. I was selling more chameleons online, and people come up and buy my plants. I actually sold plants because I'm like, okay, I give up. I'm going to keep putting new plants in the cage. Keep putting. I brought a whole bunch of plants because I could put them in with people with the different chameleons, and I just
That's
sold
funny.
plants.
Yeah, I definitely had the same exact experience where you're sitting at the table watching the online sales come in, and you're not making sales in the show. Like,
And people could do so much better. And this is the third theme that people say, that if we did it better, we could sell more. And someone's either going to go and not ever get another reptile, or at least if someone tells them that reptile doesn't look good, or that thing's wild caught and it's not going to live very long, come to me and I'll give you a captive bred. Buying on price is a good idea, but I buy the
yeah,
higher price than the lower price because I know that person is taking care of it. And I was selling for more because I would just keep my price high, or I just wouldn't
yeah,
sell. I think that's another reason why I'm not a prolific breeder, because I don't want my chameleons going to just
yeah.
anybody. So
It's a challenging balance. I think that the reality is people are going to make mistakes, right? People, like, I made mistakes. I was very serious about it when I got started, and I made a bunch of mistakes with my first pair. They didn't live to their full life expectancy, and I learned from that experience. I improved. I started to recognize illness. Right? I mean, there's a lot of things to learn when you're just getting started, and I think one of the things that gives me some sympathy for people is because I was nowhere near perfect, and I still am not. The challenges that other people are having, it's like I've been through that, right? I don't pretend like it's like night and day. You should just all of a sudden know everything and be successful. Even though that's what people try to pretend on social media, it's like that's not how it works. People are going to learn, they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to grow as a herpetoculturalist and as a chameleon owner. And I think that's part of what makes me return to it and continue to want to work at it, is because we're still learning so much. We still don't know many different things, and so I really enjoy the challenge that presents. I think that shows are starting to step up though and understand this. I've been hearing positive things related to ethical standards at shows, and the more of that we do, I think I saw a really cool show that Frank was going to in Pennsylvania that was like all small batch with like really nice setups and focused on care. And I think the price for the show was ridiculous. Like, the price for the show compared to any other show I've seen, it was, I think it was like $50 or something. It was high. Yeah, that was just to attend as a person.
yeah, 'cause that's a normal vendor amount.
It was a pricey entry ticket on purpose because they wanted fewer people and they wanted more time with a select group of vendors, right? So they tried this business model out, which was pretty unique, and I was like, well, that's really cool. I would love to attend that if I have some free time. I think it was in Pennsylvania. Frank could say more. I saw it on his page and I was like, wow, this is a really cool idea. I saw him at a Pennsylvania show once. He came to my booth when I was first getting started. It was before the pandemic, and he showed up and I didn't recognize him, and he sat there talking to me for like 15 minutes and then told me he was Frank Payne, and I almost lost it. Like I wanted to give him a hug, but I couldn't. He was on the other side of the table. So he that's when I met him the first time, and then I've been up a couple times to get some equipment from him when he's doing some changes to his enclosures. But yeah, I think that really is what I love about shows, is the people you meet, the stories, the conversation. And so I really do like that model of purposely trying to limit the numbers of people and
Mhm.
to kind of filter out. And there's a place for the bring a kid to a carnival type thing, like just let them run through the show and see all the animals. And I think that's great. Like I as a kid would absolutely love that. It's a perfect experience for that type of thing. But there is an opportunity, I think, for also the more serious herpetoculturist type shows where you might have a higher price point to just walk in the door, but that results in just a different type of interaction with the vendors, and the expectation that it really is about those conversations. You can spend more time because there's not that many people. You're not as worried about, like, if I talk to this person for 30 minutes, I'm going to miss like 10 conversations, where you can get that kind of feel at some of the larger shows. Like I did a show in New York City once, and it was one of the bigger shows there, and there were just so many people that if you found yourself actually engrossed in conversation with someone, you started to feel like you saw like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people pass by while you're talking, and you're like, geez, I should try to find a way to like move to the next conversation. And you get that feeling as a vendor when we are at some of the larger shows. And I think that if you knew that people were that dedicated to put that money down, and they were probably there just to see you because they saw you on the list, I think that that would be pretty cool too. So I've never vended at that type of a show, but I think it would just be interesting to see them try different business models, right? Try different, you target the kids, you target the more serious attendees, and kind of mix it up.
Yeah, I noticed that some of the shows near me, as they got busier and busier and it got harder and harder to get into
Yeah,
them, the quality went up. So I'm sure that that's part of it, that you have to still make money on a show and you wouldn't do it otherwise. So they don't axe vendors that are trouble until they get someone to replace them. And it seems like now more and more that the shows are very hard to get into around me. And so it's like they're getting greater and greater quality and new
that's
people
good.
and all kinds of different stuff. I see plants, I see jewelry, all this little stuff, especially when Tinley happens because it's only 5 hours from here. So that's twice a year. And that month, if it lands on the same day as
Yeah,
the Tinley show, there are all kinds of new vendors. You're like, wow, but that's their opportunity to try new people out, see what it's like because it's a smaller. So I don't have any more questions for you. You have any final thoughts for the
I really appreciate you inviting me on to have a quick conversation. I'm excited for the future as we continue to explore various topics. And anybody who wants to reach out, check out iPardalis.com. I'm on social media on Instagram, iPardalis on Instagram, iPardalis on Facebook, iPardalis on YouTube. I guess now if you search for it, you'll find me, and it's just me. So it will be me answering the any questions that you have. So
You have an incredible website. I'm jealous. Just going to it, looking at all the different animals, you have all the lineage. It's well thought out. It's like everything else you do. You do it well or you don't do it at all. So people need to go to that and even just to look in and search it, not to make it too busy that your website goes down,
I,
but to actually just take a look at it. And it's something just like the individual raising is something to look up to.
I've thought about open sourcing it, just like giving the source code to the public so anybody could use it. I haven't met anybody who likes to code and likes chameleons, but if you do, I'm totally open to open
Mhm.
sourcing the project and letting you take a look and have at it.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. Thanks. Have a good
You too.
night. Please join our Facebook group, Reptile Show Reporter, pictured here. Thanks.